Just a quick observation on some of that. On the supermarkets thing, it's another example of if you only look at the numbers, you don't really get the full impact because I think you said 22 million EBITDA, but c- I mean the mouths that will feed in Kenya is probably disproportionate to the mouths an equivalently sized business would feed in Western Europe.
It's another very important dimension to what we do as investors in Africa. I know it's very important everywhere in the world, but this impact ESG focus that we have is actually much more significant that I experienced in Europe when I was actually as a partner investor in Europe. And as you said, our impact as investors on the ground, on the job creation, the quality of the job, which is people are paid minimum wage, they get holidays, they get promoted, they get healthcare. One person working at Quickmart is probably feeding 12 people in his family.
Right.
And one vegetable on the racks at Quickmart is actually a full supply chain of ladies in farms cultivating vegetable, being sure they're going to be able to sell them at a given price, and growing their business and local business. So we are enabling value chains much more. We are building ecosystems, which is not the case anymore in Europe. That's why I find it much more exciting to do investment in Africa, despite the risk. But you have the opportunity to make good returns, but you also have the opportunity to do good.
I think the whole discussion about whether there is a trade-off between making money and doing good, that's an entirely moot point in Africa because if you're making money based on providing things that people want and human flourishing, then they just go naturally hand in hand. It's not so easy, I think, in the developed world when some of the kind of the virtuous things that you are tracking are kind of slightly more political and ideological. But if you are trying to make an impact on the ground in people's lives, you cannot avoid but make a positive impact if you're going to make money.
We present ourselves very often as responsible investors because we are fundamentally promoting sustainable Africa and trying to have an impact in through the investment we are making. And second, because we are majority investors, so we are responsible of what we do. And I like the double sense of this word because it's on our own shoulders, right, to deliver. Where I'm a little bit more struggling with my investors, usually coming from Europe or the US, is that they are imposing on us very strong agenda around climate and gender, for example, where I truly believe today that impact in Africa starts from the bottom, provide jobs, provide sourcing to people, provide pricing. Because yes, we can focus on climate in Africa, but Africa as a whole today represents 3% of the global emission. So I can put solar panel on the rooftop of the quick mart shops, no problem. We'll do it. But putting climate on top of the agenda, where we are addressing poverty first, and feeding families and providing jobs, and is a little bit a European, or I would say Occidental view of something that we don't need to apply as is in Africa, in my view.
Well, I think you're putting it politely. I think it's entirely hard-hearted and colonial. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. There was something I wanted to ask you actually, which is kind of delicate, and that's the presence of corruption and the necessity, perhaps sometimes, to deal with local officials on the ground, and maybe the presence of bribery to get things done. How do you navigate that kind of? And I'm sure there's no single answer, but generally speaking, do you have principles or red lines or ways that you confront the kind of the grayness of that kind of situation?
No, absolutely. It's a very good point, and it's a point we need to all discuss openly. I would say we deal with it through three key elements. First, we do not invest in anything that is related to extractive industries, mining, oil and gas, because that's actually, we don't invest in companies that require concessions, licenses from the government, and we don't invest in companies that have significant public exposure, like serving public clients, whatever. And that's actually already carving out 80% of the source of what you're describing as potentially organized, systemic, large corruption issue, right? Because you don't deal with that kind of businesses and you don't touch those businesses. We are in the B2B, B2C space, private customers, no public. We don't serve public. First thing. The second thing is actually we run very strict due diligence on business integrity, and for sure. So we don't know what we don't know, but we do put, that's a big part of our due diligence processes. I mean, we spent a lot of time on that. I think it's It's probably not neglected, but it's much less in Europe. You don't necessarily do a BI and a corruption review and investigation on the deals you do in Europe. In Africa, it's systematic. We do it systematically. We run a process, we evaluate, etc. And the third point is choose your partners. I mean, people have reputation. I live in Morocco. I can tell you, I'm not going to tell you, but I can tell you people I don't want to invest with and people I'm glad to invest. I mean, it's known, it's well known. If you come from London, maybe you don't know it because over a weekend, somebody can fool yourself or a business can fool yourself. But by being here, I know what so then the zero risk doesn't exist. And we have been experiencing sometimes some little issue, not big corruption, but some behavior, some practices that we have to stop at the risk of losing business, by the way, because if you don't play by the rules, you lose your business. But that's our duty to do it and then to rebuild the company on better grounds, I would say. But it's clear that it's something you need to think about very carefully when you invest in Africa. And so you need to choose your partner properly. And I think the big value of Adenia being on the ground, having excluded some segment of the business in which we don't operate, is preventing us from being significantly exposed to that. Then, if you talk to me about small corruption, whatever, I can tell you my story about building a house in France and dealing with a local authority. And I can tell you that it was easier to buy my house here in Morocco. So you see what I mean? So let's not also overemphasize this problem of corruption in Africa because you pay something to get your visa or whatever. I mean, it's honestly, it is improving significantly.
Yeah, that's a very fair point, and I'm very conscious that look, corruption is everywhere, and in the West, it's just legal and it's subtle. It's more to do with things like regulatory capture, but it becomes much more of a less a legal issue and more of just an ethical one. But it is everywhere. I hope I didn't ask the question just because we're talking about Africa.
I don't want to blame anybody, but it's true that when you speak about Africa, people tend to come to, wow, poverty, instability, no rule of law, geopolitical risk, even wars and conflicts and arms, whatever, and corruption everywhere. How can you do business there? And I hope I've tried during this conversation to show you that people I was working in Europe. I did my MBA in the US, Harvard Business School. We have 5 Harvard Business School in our team, at the partner level. So, and we love our continent. We love to live here. And I can tell you, it's not as bad as people think from abroad. But you need to deal with it. It's true. You need to address it and be realistic about it and pragmatic.